In this unit, I'm going to show you how you can bring CAD files into your Revit projects and utilize that information. Now, there's three main reasons why you would want to do this. Number one, you've got let's say a building plan or a site survey in a CAD format, let's say DWG or DXF. So you want to bring that file into your Revit project and use that as a starting point to model your 3D design. You may have existing CAD details which you either want to bring in and just utilize as they are. So a standard detail, let's say, that you want to bring into a project and just reference that detail. Or the third reason, you may have a detail that's nearly what you're after, but you want to bring it in and adapt it within Revit to represent the detail you actually need. So in this unit, I'm going to take you through all three of those scenarios. I just want to start off by explaining the two fundamental ways we can bring CAD files into our Revit project, and that is either by linking them in or importing them. So in either case, you need to switch to the Insert menu. So if we look up at the ribbon, we go to Insert. This is where we can bring in a variety of different file formats into our Revit project. But for now, in this unit, we're just going to concentrate on the CAD formats. So the two main panels are Link and Import. So we either want to link CAD or we want to import CAD. Now, the two main differences between linking and importing: with linking, you are basically creating a reference back to the original CAD file that may sit on your hard drive, on your server somewhere, and that CAD file stays in that location, and every time you open your Revit project, Revit will go and find that original CAD file and take an instance of it and bring it into this project. So the great thing about that is if in between your Revit sessions that CAD file has changed in some way, let's say someone else in the team is working on it, when you next open your Revit project, you will get the latest updated version of that CAD file. The other method is to import the CAD file into the Revit project. In this case, it goes and finds the original file when you do the import process, and it literally makes that CAD file part of the overall RVT Revit project file. So if the original file is then updated, you won't receive those updates because you've just done a one-time import. So there are sort of pros and cons of each of those methods. If the original file is likely to change and you need to be aware of those updates and have those incorporated, it's better to link it in. Also, it doesn't increase the file size of the Revit project too much because it is literally just doing a link to it. Now with the import method, the file size, i.e. the RVT project file, will go up because it also now contains not only the Revit elements but also the CAD file. But you haven't got to worry about whether the original file is kept in the same location, whether it's deleted, because you are capturing that during that import process. So if you're sending your Revit project to someone else on a disk, or you're archiving it and you need to incorporate that CAD information, then import's probably the best way to go with that. Now, whether you decide to link or import your CAD file into your Revit project, the actual process of getting it in there is virtually identical. So remember, you need to switch to the Insert menu, decide whether you're linking or importing. I'm just going to use the Import CAD button now just to show you the dialog box. I say this is virtually identical if you choose to link CAD. Now there's two main parts to this panel. The top is the file browser. It's typical of any sort of file browser within Windows, where you get to choose the file you want to link in or import. So I've got a favorite link here to a folder called DWG files, and let's say we want to bring in this DWG file here called School Plan. So that's the first part, the file browser at the top here, and the second part is this collection of settings down here at the bottom of the panel. Now I'm just going to run you through each of these and explain what they do. Now the crucial thing to remember here is you need to go through these and set them accordingly before you hit the open button. So before you actually bring this CAD file into your Revit project. And that's because the things you choose here, the options you select, actually have an effect on what Revit does as it brings in this file into the project. So if you want to go and change your mind on any of these after, you can't do it once this process is complete. It's not the end of the world. You just need to either delete the import or unlink it if you've linked it in, and just bring this box up again and bring it in with the correct settings. So I'll just take you now through each of these with a quick explanation of what they do. So let's start over on the left, current view only. If you have that box ticked on, when you bring your DWG into your Revit project, it will only be visible in the view in which you've currently got active, in which you bring it into. Now I would strongly suggest you leave that unchecked. That means that you have the potential to view your DWG in any of your Revit views, and I'll show you a little later in the unit how you can then control that visibility of the DWG on a per view basis. Moving along towards the center, colours. This refers to the colours of the DWG. So you can preserve them, they'll come in the colours of the original file format. You can invert them, or you can have Revit just convert it to black and white. Layers and levels. So obviously AutoCAD uses layers. By far the best is just to bring all of them in, unless there are a handful of specific layers you need, in which case you can specify, you can choose that option. You'll then have a dialog box presented with all the layers in the original DWG file, and you can choose which ones you want. Import units. By default, Revit's going to auto detect. It's going to try and work out the units of the DWG file. I would suggest that sort of 95–99% of the time Revit will get that right. As a good check, when you bring your DWGs in, I would just use the measuring tool to just satisfy yourself that it has got that right. So if it's a building plan, just measure across a doorway. If it's a site plan, measure across a road, for example, in that DWG, and just check it's at the right scale. Now this is a really important one down here. Correct lines that are slightly off axis. Really be careful with this one. By default it's ticked on. I always uncheck that box. Now what that does is, if Revit finds lines that are very slightly off axis or not quite perpendicular, it will actually alter the DWG as part of that import process and make those lines perpendicular. Now if this is a site survey or a survey of an existing building, do you really want Revit to start manipulating those survey lines and moving them on axis? Personally for me, I want that DWG to come into Revit exactly as it was surveyed. Then I can decide the status of those lines. We can approximate them when we put sort of walls over the top, but you have no way of knowing, if you have that ticked on, which lines Revit has manipulated, which ones it's adjusted. So I would always turn that off. Positioning. This refers to the coordinate systems. So center to center, we'll just take the extents of your DWG file and stick it in the middle of your Revit file. Origin to origin, probably the safest by far. Literally take 000 of your DWG and align that to the origin, i.e. 000 of the Revit project. Place at. It'll pick this up from the view you're currently working in, but typically CAD files are 2D. You can work with 3D, it's absolutely no problem, but if it's a 2D survey, it will come in as a plane aligned with the plan view, if it's a plan view you're working in when you're performing this operation. So Revit is basically saying, where do you want that DWG plane placed at? So I'm going to have a level 0 in this case, and orient to view, say it will line it up. So if you're working in a plan view and you bring in a 2D CAD plan, then it will make sure that those line up. So as I said before, you need to go through each of these and satisfy yourself that you've made the correct options before you go ahead and open the file, because depending on what you've selected here, Revit will very quickly perform various operations on this file as part of that import process. Okay, so we've just spent a little time going through those import settings. Let's actually look at how that works in practice. So I've got a brand new blank Revit project here. Let's say we want to start a new school project. We've got an existing school building where we have the DWG floor plan for it. So we actually want to use that existing survey plan as a template to start building our 3D model of the school. So remember, insert menu. Now I'm going to import the CAD rather than link it. Import there. Go and find my file. So schoolplan.dwg. Now remember, current view only. I'm going to untick that. I'm going to see that plan in all the views, and I'll turn it off in the views I don't want to see later on. I'm going to preserve the colors of the DWG file. I want to bring all the layers in. I'm going to let Revit have a go at getting the units right. Remember that one there, correct lines that are slightly off axis. I would suggest to leave that unchecked at all times. Origin to origin. I want my 2D plan to come in at level 0. I'm going to orient it to view. Okay, so we're happy with the settings. Chosen the file. Just need to hit open. Now you may have to zoom all, or zoom extents, I'm going to do it on the keyboard ZA, to actually see where that file's been placed. So I'm just going to zoom in here. One important thing to note is if you choose origin to origin as your positioning system as part of the linking or importing process, then Revit will automatically pin the DWG in place once it arrives in the Revit project. This is so you can't accidentally move it and mess up the coordinates. So if you do need to reposition the DWG for any reason once it's in, you just need to select it and unpin it first. Now you're free to move it around, and then you can repin it back into position. So we now have our DWG file in our Revit project. So I switch to level 1. I can still see it. I'm further up in the 3D world, but I'm looking down on the file. If I switch to a 3D view, there it is, and if I just orbit round, you can see that it comes in as a 2D plane. Now you'll remember at the import stage there was that option for current view only, and I unchecked that box, or made sure it didn't have a tick in it. That means I can see it in all these different views. If I'd have ticked that box, it would only be visible in the view in which I was working in this case it was level 0 when I brought it in. You can see it's much more flexible to be able to reference that DWG from various other views, such as other floor plans or the 3D view. So we've now got our DWG plan into our Revit project. We can actually use this now to start building up the 3D model of the existing. So I'm working in the level 0 floor plan. I go ahead and select wall. Now I've already used the measuring tool to measure the thickness of the existing walls, and they are approximately 300 mm thick. So I've set up a wall type, just called it existing 300. Now you'll recall from the unit on walls that the draw palette gives us a range of options for how we actually put the walls into our model. Now one of the most useful in this scenario where we've got a DWG to work with is this pick lines tool. So I'm going to swap to pick lines. This will actually now detect the lines in the DWG file. I set the height for my wall. For this demonstration I'm just going to leave this on unconnected of 8 meters high. You might have an eaves height off the DWG survey, but for now I'm just going to leave that at 8 meters. But I will change this parameter here, location line, because I'm going to work with the pick lines tool on the external face of the external walls. So if I swap that to finish face exterior, so that's the line I'm going to define. Make sure I'm on pick wall or pick lines, and now if I hover over, I can very quickly find the walls. Now just be careful, you can see the dotted line there as I put the walls in. Just be careful which side is going to represent the exterior face. Now notice I'm not going along every segment. The pick lines tool is actually just placing walls on the line segment it's finding in a DWG. So I'll just do a couple more as an example and then show you how we tidy this up. So now I would cancel out the wall command, and in modify I would trim to corner. I know that that wall goes all the way along there, so I can just trim that to that. I can trim that to that, and so forth. So you can see very quickly we can start to build up a 3D model using the DWG as a template underneath. Just go back to the plan view. Doors. There's an external door there. Let's go to architecture door. Switch to a door. Now, of course, you're going to be measuring this exactly. I'm just going to place a door in here, and we might need to hand that over. Now I'm just going to switch my detail level in this view to coarse, which will give a solid coarse fill to the walls. That helps to make it easier to see where we've actually placed Revit walls and where we've still got to add them. Now in terms of placing doors and windows, if we right click on a wall and override graphics in view by category and surface transparency, and we move that up to roughly midway, 60%, apply, you can now see that we can see through the walls. So when we come to place our doors and windows, actually makes it easy to see in order to make sure they're accurately located. Once you've traced round your DWG file in order to build up a model of the existing building, you'll probably want to turn off the visibility of the CAD file in each view. All you need to do is hit VV or VG as a keyboard shortcut. Remember, that brings up the visibility and graphics overrides. Now, if you have linked a CAD file or imported a CAD file into your project, you will get this tab here, Imported Categories. So we can see here the name of the DWG file, and if you hit the little plus button, you do actually have access to all the layers in the original DWG. I just want to turn the whole DWG off in terms of visibility, so I can collapse that and just untick again schoolplan.dwg, hit OK, and you can see we're now left with just the Revit elements. Of course, if you've linked the DWG in, you might want to unlink it and actually sort of orphan it away from the project. However, it's quite useful to retain the DWG in the background, so to speak, and just turn off its visibility. So if you've got any queries about what sort of happens in certain rooms, it's very easy then just to go back and turn that back on, do some checks, and then turn it off again. So retain it in the Revit project, but just turn off its visibility when you don't need to see it. One question that comes up time and again, mainly from AutoCAD users, is can I reuse the details that I've already produced in AutoCAD in my Revit projects? Well, the answer is a definite yes. I'm going to show you how to do that now. So, got a blank Revit project here. So I'm just going to very quickly add some walls. Going to put a door in, and I'm going to create a section view through that model. So let's say we already have a standard detail for how a door head meets an external wall. We've produced that in AutoCAD. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, we just want to reuse that detail within Revit. So we can bring that CAD detail into this project. Now we can bring it in and actually place the detail straight on here. Another alternative is to create a drafting view. So let's do that, let's say at 1 to 5. So we've got a blank drafting view. Remember the unit on drafting views earlier in the course. It doesn't reference the model in any shape or form, but if this is just a standard typical detail that happens in various locations around the project, then a drafting view might be appropriate. So we've got our blank canvas in the drafting view. We can now go to Insert, Import CAD, and got this typical detail. You can see it's a DWG file. Got a thumbnail preview of it here. Remember, check these settings down here. The positioning, I'm just going to manually center it. Hit open, click to place the detail, and there it is. So if I switch back to the section view, we might want to produce a call out of this area here to point towards our standard detail. So remember, call out, hit call out there, and before you define the call out boundary, got reference other view, tick that on, pick the drafting view with the detail on. Now we can draw our boundary, and if we double click on the call out head, it takes us to this drafting view with our standard detail that we've brought in from AutoCAD. You'll remember this building plan from earlier on in the unit. This is a DWG that we imported. Now if I click on that import to select it, we've got some options up here, so I want to run through with you. We do have the option to explode it. Now there's two versions there, a partial explode and a full explode. A partial explode will explode it into its constituent blocks. So for example, if when someone produced this in AutoCAD, they produce blocks and then put all those together into one DWG, doing a partial explode will just sort of explode it one level in its hierarchy into separate DWG blocks. You can keep doing that until you get down to the individual lines, arcs, etc. in the DWG file, or you can just go straight to a full explode. Now when you do a full explode, Revit will actually convert the DWG elements to Revit elements. So the lines and arcs, etc. in the AutoCAD file will be converted to detail lines, Revit detail lines. Your hatch patterns in a Revit file will be converted to filled regions. So basically a full explode will convert the AutoCAD object, the file, into a series of Revit objects. At that point obviously you can manipulate them, you can trim them, edit them. So typically if you've got a detail that you've brought in out of AutoCAD and it's not quite right, doesn't quite match your design, you need to adjust it, you could bring it in from AutoCAD, explode it and then adjust it accordingly, and then even save it as a Revit detail into a separate library file, and we covered that earlier in the course. Typically with a building plan like this, I would suggest you're not going to be exploding them, you are just using them as a template to trace over to build your model, again as we saw earlier on in this unit. So just before I explode this, just want to show you something else. That's this query tool here. So with the CAD import selected, you'll have options to query it. If I hit query, we can now hover over and you can see it, rather than detecting the whole object, it's detecting the individual elements that make up the CAD file. And if I select one of them, it actually tells me a little bit about the AutoCAD element itself. So it's a line, what layer it's on, a few other bits of sort of read-only data there. So quite useful, particularly with sort of site surveys if you're not sure which of the contour lines or what certain lines are representing in a survey. Quite often those lines reside on layers that have been named according to like major contour, minor contour, surface water drainage, etc. So you might want to use that query tool to actually find out what objects are and what layers they sit on. So let's go back to exploding this. I'm going to do a full explode. Depending on the size of the file, might take a few seconds. So that took about 20 seconds to explode. I just cut that out of the video to save you just sort of sitting there watching that. So this is what we ended up with. So I'm going to unjoin some elements there, and now so if I select that text, we've got normal Revit text. Likewise, so just select that door swing, that's Revit detail lines. Just be aware that when Revit exploded that DWG, it did not convert the lines to Revit objects. So these aren't Revit walls or doors or windows, they are simply detail lines and Revit text. In the original DWG file, these were just lines and arcs, so Revit has no way of knowing what these are meant to represent, so it can't create BIM objects automatically. So that's for you to do after you've brought the DWG into your Revit project.
And that completes this unit. To get the most out of this training material, please take the complete course online at bimscape.com. Here you will find a complete learning management system that allows you to work through the course at your own pace. Comprehensive written tutorials provide additional information to that found in the training videos. Mark each unit as complete as you finish it and move on to the next. At any point you can return to any of the units you have previously completed to go over the material again. If you'd like to take this course online, please visit www.bimscape.com/Revit for details.